So we're one of the older industry associations in the state. Kennecott, the predecessor of Kennecott Utah Copper Company, was our founding member, and they're still our largest member today. And people ask, what do you do? And the basic answer to that is we're a lobbying organization. And so we work with the legislature, we work with the federal government, with regulatory agencies, state governments, local governments, anybody that has any potential to impact mining, and we advocate for mining-friendly policies to make sure that our operators can go out and extract the minerals that we all rely on in our modern lives. We also work with a lot of service companies that work in the mining industry, so anyone from equipment operators to law firms to environmental consultancies, all the different people that are working and have an interest in keeping the mining industry healthy. Let's see if this works. Oh yeah, there we go. So I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to be focusing on, more on the modern industry, but I do want to talk a little bit about the history of mining here in the state, just on a very high level. So again, I work in government. I work at the Capitol. I'm there, during the legislative session every single day, and this is actually part of the cyclorama that's in the rotunda of the Capitol, and this is one of the panels there, and the panels depict very significant scenes from Utah's history. And this is General Patrick E. Connor, who was inaugurating mining in the state of Utah. So he was the one that established the first commercial mining district in Utah in 1863. And that was the Bingham District. It's still our largest and most productive district all these years later, but he's sort of the father of Utah mining, so this is something that you can see when you go to the Capitol. This is actually one of two pictures that are in the governor's office. They're on either side of his sort of main reception area, and this is also a depiction of Bingham Canyon in an earlier time. You can see the train trestle there, and this is back when they were hauling ore with trains instead of those trucks that Glenn was talking about. The governor lives in the Smoot Mansion, which was, this is silver money from the Park City district. And then on the left here, you'll see Daniel Jacklin. This is one of the statues at the Capitol. It's actually not there right now because they're building a new building at the Capitol complex. But Daniel Jacklin was the one that came up with a lot of the methods to extract copper from very, very low-grade ores, which is what we have in the Bingham District and elsewhere, where they have these copper porphyry deposits. And so you're talking about parts per million, parts per billion in terms of the amount of copper that are in these ore bodies. And he created a lot of the processes, which a version of which are still used today to make those type of mines productive. A lot of the very famous places that people come and visit as tourist destinations now, like Park City and Moab, were originally started as mining districts. And then obviously we have the great opportunities to visit an area like this here at Silver Reef, and very grateful for all the folks that have preserved and kept this such a wonderful destination so people can understand the mining history, and we have similar sites all over the state. So I want to talk a little bit about the modern mining industry, and the best economic impact studies we have actually combine mining with oil and gas and energy. So those three industries together, it's about almost $23 billion in combined GDP contribution, gross domestic product contribution to the state of Utah, which is about 10% of the state's economy. So again, mining, energy, oil and gas are contributing about 10% to our state's economy, but interestingly, they contribute about 20% of the state's tax revenue. And so we have an outsized impact on the tax revenues that, fund our government and all the services that our citizens rely on. And in fact, Rio Tinto Kennecott, for example, is the largest single taxpayer in Salt Lake County and has been for a very, very long time. And in fact, there are some studies that show that Rio Tinto and its predecessor companies have actually contributed more tax revenue to the state of Utah than any other entity in the state's history. So again, very important part of our state developing. About 162,000 combined direct and indirect jobs. And the wages are still, you heard Glenn talk a little bit about the $4 a day, and those were the best wages that were available. They're still some of the best wages that are available in the state, so almost 51% higher than the average state wage. And if you get into some of the rural counties, like Carbon and Grand and others, they're actually significantly higher, over 100% higher than the average county wage. And that actually holds true even in Salt Lake County. Now, I have to admit, in Salt Lake County, we kind of go back and forth between the mining industry and the tech industry or the financial services industry, but in the last round of data, we were ahead, so I'm gonna claim it. In 2023, we had about $4.3 billion in mineral production, and that was just the actual value of the minerals that were sold. And we rank about 11th nationally for non-fuel mineral production, and we kind of go back and forth here. You know, we're usually in the top 10. This last time we were a little bit out of the top 10, but a significant mining state overall. One of the things that Utah is very blessed with is we have an incredibly diverse mineral estate. So these are all the minerals that we're actually currently producing here in the state of Utah. And you can see, I mean, this goes the whole range from hard rock minerals, your base metals, your precious metals, industrial minerals, coal, uranium, you know, fuel minerals. And so we're very, very blessed here in Utah that we have such a diverse mineral estate. There are other states surrounding us, especially places like Nevada. Nevada's mining industry is substantially larger than ours. However, the vast majority of what they produce in Nevada is gold and silver, which is great when you've got, you know, markets like we have now where, you know, the price of gold is over, you know, $3,000 an ounce. But in times when those prices go down, it actually can make their industry contract pretty substantially and all at once. And so we're a little bit more diversified here, and that helps to spread out the risk in these very risky commodity-driven industries. So this is something you can see too, just how all of these are, you know, these minerals are spread out around the state. So there are very few counties where we don't actually have significant mining operations. So again, a very statewide industry. I want to talk a little bit about energy because the two sort of hot topics right now are energy and critical minerals, and I'll get to both of these. So one of the first, if you want to call it a sort of economic development incentives that was offered by the Utah legislature was actually, and this was the territorial legislature in 1854, they offered a cash prize of $1,000, which back in 1854 was obviously a lot of money, for anybody that could find a coal source that was within 40 miles of Salt Lake City. Now, to the best of our knowledge, nobody was able to actually claim this. They did find coal eventually. Most of it was down in San Pete County and, you know, Carbon County, Emery County. They did eventually find a coal source about 25 miles away in Colville. Wasn't a very good coal source. They mined it out very quickly. This is actually a picture of the Chalk Creek area in Summit, what's now Summit County, where they started doing this. But it was very important because most of the wood that we were taking out of the mountains, we were trying to reserve for building. And so they really wanted coal to be able to, for heat and for industrial purposes. So, you know, energy has really driven a lot of our economy in getting minerals for energy purposes. It's still today, you know, coal and natural gas account for almost 85% of the energy we consume here in Utah. And, you know, a lot of those renewables, sometimes that renewable percentage will be higher, you know, when we have good hot days, and other times it's a lot lower. And so having that baseload power that comes from fuel sources that you control is very, very important to our state. And I have to give credit to the state legislature. They've done a great job in trying to preserve some of our baseload generation assets. This is something that they haven't done in other states, which is why you're seeing so many problems with the grid right now and fluctuations in energy prices that we're not having here in Utah. And that's partly because we've done a good job in preserving our baseload generation assets. This is actually a picture. One of the things that's happening here in Utah, we actually are opening coal mines in Utah. Most other places, they're closing them down. So we actually had a coal mine that opened up last year called the Fossil Rock Mine in Emery County. And this is actually the first load of coal that came from that mine into the Hunter Power Plant in Emery County. So the next thing that everybody's talking about is critical minerals. So we're going to talk a little bit about critical minerals here. This is a big scary chart. You're not going to be able to see it very well, but the reason that I put this up here, this is actually from a study from the U.S. Geological Survey, and this is what's called the Mineral Commodity Summary, and it shows the import reliance that we have for various minerals. So basically, in this, blue is bad, right? So the more blue, the worse it is. And we here in the U.S. right now, we're more than 50% dependent on foreign production for 47 different important mineral commodities, and 100% dependent for 16 mineral commodities. And some of these things we'll talk about today, but they're things you've never heard of, but you can't make your cell phones without them, your smartphones, you can't make missile systems, you can't make F-35s, you can't make a lot of things. And again, if you have, you know, foreign competitors that decide to cut off these mineral supply chains and you don't have those supply chains here, it's a national security and an economic security risk. And especially because China, who, you know, is not always friendly with the U.S. and we're not always friendly with them, is actually the leading source for most of these commodities. And just in the last year, and even in the last number of weeks, the Chinese have expanded the export controls or outright bans that they have on a number of these mineral commodities. These are some of the ones here where there are export controls or outright bans right now. The thing about these 10 groups or individual mineral commodities, we actually have 9 of these here in Utah, just in Utah. And if you expand that to the other western states and other states in the US, we can provide all of these for ourselves, but we just haven't. We've let a lot of these supply chains dwindle over the years. And just to give you a sense, this is just sort of on the national security side and just talking about rare earths. I'm sure you've heard a lot about rare earths in the news. And rare earths are actually, a group of 17 minerals. People sort of interchange rare earths and critical minerals a little bit, but the rare earths are a very particular group of minerals. And, for an F-35, you have to have about 920 pounds of rare earth elements to build an F-35. 5,200 pounds for an Arleigh-Burke destroyer, 9,200 pounds for a Virginia-class submarine. So if we don't have the ability to supply these for ourselves, again, there are whole national security systems that could potentially go offline. Utah, again, is very blessed in that we actually host 40 of the 50 critical minerals that are on the current Department of Interior critical mineral list. And I don't want to get too much into federal politics, but there are different lists that the federal government has. The sort of major list is held by the Department of Interior, and it has 50 minerals on it. That list is going to be expanding because, some executive orders and some congressional action. It's likely to go up to 55-ish minerals. We'll know that in the next number of months. So this number will adjust a little bit, but the point is that we've got a lot of these minerals here in Utah that we could be producing. So I want to talk a little bit about what we are producing. We are the leading global supplier of beryllium, and beryllium, again, is something that's very important, especially for aerospace and defense applications. And I'm sure some of you have seen pictures of the James Webb Space Telescope, and the Space Telescope that has those, amazing golden mirrors that are all around it. Those actually aren't gold, those are beryllium. And all of that beryllium came from Millard and Juab County here in Utah. And so we control about 80% of the global beryllium market just out of that one operation up in the mines actually in Juab County, and then the first stage of processing is in Millard County. We're producing platinum, palladium, and tellurium from Rio Tinto Kennecott. And again, these are byproducts of the Rio Tinto Kennecott, which is primarily a copper mine. We're producing uranium, vanadium, and rare earth elements at Energy Fuels, which is the uranium mill down in San Juan County. It's the last working uranium mill in the whole country. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. On the stuff that we could be producing side, we have the only established domestic source of indium, and indium is something that you guys touch every day because it's a critical element of smartphones. Anything that has a touch screen actually has a little bit of indium in it, and then they use it for a lot of other applications. And we've got enough indium out in the West Desert that we could supply the whole U.S. supply for about 14 years. But again, it hasn't been developed yet. We have the only known primary domestic source of germanium and gallium. These are things that are also in the news right now. They're very important for a lot of technology and aerospace applications. And there's actually the Apex mine here in Washington County is the only place where you can mine germanium and gallium directly. Usually germanium and gallium is a byproduct of other mining. We have the largest known alunite deposit in the U.S., which is up in Beaver County. And alunite is the other way that you can make aluminum. So the primary way you make it is from a mineral called bauxite, which is what they mine primarily up in Canada and Australia. But the other way you can make it is from alunite, so we could be a major producer of aluminum. Also, the only significant production of fluorspar should be coming online this year. Fluorspar is, again, a mineral that's used for alloying purposes. And then 2 proven large-scale zinc deposits that we have. We're the only producer of magnesium metal, and magnesium you've got in every soda can. It's a hardening agent for aluminum, and also is used in a lot of military application, like all the anti-missile flares that airframes use are made out of pure magnesium. Your steering wheel is probably made out of almost pure magnesium, and we're one of only 2 states that are currently producing lithium right now. And then we have prolific historical production of these: bismuth, arsenic, antimony, barite, manganese, and tungsten. And so these are things we've mined a lot of in the past and we could mine more of in the future. And then some occurrences of cobalt, tin, rare earth elements as primary production, titanium, zirconium, and hafnium. So That's all very nice. So the point of this is that a lot of these minerals, again, if we have the economic incentives and the national will to produce these minerals, we could, so that we didn't have to be reliant on foreign production. I just want to show you a little bit. This is a chart that I stole from Rio Tinto Kennecott. So Rio Tinto Kennecott is, again, by far our largest mining operation, massive copper producer, one of the biggest copper mines in the U.S. and the world. They produce a ton of gold, silver, molybdenum, platinum, palladiums, or all kinds of things. And the thing that's fascinating about that deposit is they could actually be producing even more than they already are. And if you see here, this is what they're currently producing on the critical mineral side: tellurium, rhenium, platinum, palladium. But they could be doing bismuth, indium, germanium, gallium, manganese and zinc, arsenic, cobalt. There's a lot of things that they have in their deposit there. And the reason that it's important is because when they started producing tellurium, for example, tellurium is something that's used primarily in solar panels, and almost all of it came from China. And almost all the solar panel production was in China, and there were US manufacturers that wanted to end that Chinese dominance. And so they went to Rio Tinto Kennecott and they said, hey, can you produce the tellurium? We can pay you what it costs you to produce it. And within about 2 years, they started producing tellurium out of their waste streams. And so this is something where, again, because you have a permanent operation that's already in production, finding ways to pull new minerals out of those existing operations is it's the quickest way that you're going to start producing new minerals, because it's so hard to permit a new mine or reopen a historical mine here in the US. We still need to be doing that too, but using our existing operations and getting more minerals out of them is really, really important. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, again, is our uranium mill down in Blanding in San Juan County. So again, last working uranium mill in the entire US, have been producing uranium and vanadium for a long time, but a couple of years ago, they also figured out that they could import a mineral called monazite, which is actually a byproduct of zirconium and titanium heavy sand mining. And the thing about monazite is it's got a ton of rare earths in it, but it also has uranium in it, which is radioactive, and so a lot of people can't handle that. And so they started importing this monazite. In the mill, they would pull the uranium out of it, and that goes into the nuclear fuel cycle, which is very important. And then they can isolate those rare earths, and right now they're producing neodymium and praseodymium, which are the two rare earths that are most in demand. And they're planning to expand to start producing dysprosium and terbium, which are sort of the next two that are most in demand. And again, this is using an existing facility to start producing these things that, before we had to rely on China to bring in. I want to talk a little bit about some of our historic mining districts, because again, there's such great opportunities in some of these districts. The Bingham district, again, is where Rio Tinto Kennecott is, our largest and most productive district. It's going to continue to be that for a long time into the future. Rio Tinto has made significant investments to keep that mine open and to expand it. They've started going underground. They've started doing research on, again, pulling new minerals out of their ore body and even out of their tailings facilities. The East Tintic and Main Tintic districts, these are the districts around Eureka. And it's a very, very prolific historic mining district. And we actually have a number of companies that are exploring reopening historic mines there, and have one company that actually has opened up a historic mining district. The Trixie mine was the first one that they opened up, which is a gold mine, but they're also looking at silver, lead, and halloysite clay and some other potential opportunities there. The Mount Baldy in Ohio district, which is in Piute County, that's a historic silver and lead mine where they're actually trying to reopen that again, primarily as a silver mine, and they have a major silver operator, international silver operator, that's working on that. The Beaver Lake and Rocky district, which is up in Beaver County, that's where the copper mine has just reopened in the last couple of years there. It's called Milford Mining now. And they also have opportunities for gold and silver and other minerals there as well. Gold Hill is out in the West Desert, and they've been producing gold there on a small scale for a very long time, but given again the price of gold, they're trying to expand their operations. And then Gold Springs, which is actually in Iron County, almost to the Nevada border. It's the old Etna mine, and they're trying to reopen that. And then Gold Strike, which is here in Washington County. So there's a lot of with new technology, and you heard Glenn talk about, in some cases you'd get to the water table and then there just wasn't the pumping technology to keep mining after that. In some cases it was a matter of, you'd get into ore that was not that was not rich enough that it made sense to pull it out from underground. And with new technologies, a lot of these things now become possible and economical to develop. So just to finish up a little bit, we are in a very interesting time right now because there is so much emphasis on expanding our mining production and reshoring some of these critical mineral supply chains. And so just in the last number of weeks, the president has put out a few different executive orders, one to increase American mineral production, where he's tasked a number of federal agencies with figuring out, where are their permits that are kind of stuck in the gears of government and can be, pulled out, and we can start mining. To talk about, processing operations. That's another thing that has to be considered. We can mine all this stuff, but if ultimately we have to send it to China to be processed, then we're not any better off than we were in the first place. And so a lot of his executive order talks about finding ways to, again, become more self-sufficient. We actually had a Utah project, the Lisbon Valley Copper Mine, that was on the first list of fast-tracked mines that was put out at the end of April. And actually have another mine that was added later on, a uranium mine in San Juan County. And then also he signed orders to help support the domestic coal industry so that we can, again, make sure our grid stays stable. Here in the state, we've done a number of things to try and make Utah much more productive for mining and make sure that we're, retaining what we have and attracting new operations. So we have a state critical mineral strategy that's being put together to sort of show that Utah can be in a leadership position on the critical mineral side. Mineral exploration tax credit, which actually gives credits to tax credits to those that are doing that mineral exploration. So mineral exploration is pretty tricky because you're out there trying to, literally find little tiny pockets, as Glenn was talking about, those little pockets of gold and silver and other minerals underground, and it's very risky and it's very expensive. So this is a production credit where basically after you start producing, you go out and you do all the exploration, and then once you start producing, you can get a tax credit to refund you for some of those exploration expenses. High cost infrastructure tax credit, which helps with a lot of the sort of high capital expense projects that you have to have, whether that's power lines or roads or gas lines or other things, and then other financing options for increasing production here. And I think that part of this is paying off because Utah was named the #1 mining jurisdiction in the world, which is from the Fraser Institute. And this was based on a survey of thousands of mining executives all over the world, the people that are actually making the investment decisions as to where they're going to put their money. And we topped out on both the investment attractiveness index. I mean, how are you going to be able to, recover? Are there attractive mineral deposits and other things that you can develop in Utah? In top places like Nevada and Western Australia, which are very, high-level jurisdictions, and then also the Policy Perception Index, which means how friendly are Utah's policies for mining. So again, we're very grateful for the modern industry that we have, and grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about it. And if there's any questions, I'd love to answer them if we have time. Thank you. Yeah.
I know Utah is #1 according to that chart, but what other states do well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, there's most of the western states is where most of the mining in the U.S. happens. So I mean, the ones that we compete against the most, honestly, are Nevada and Arizona. Also in Idaho, they have a lot of, critical mineral operations and gold and other things. Wyoming is another major state. And there are a couple of western states that used to be much larger mining jurisdictions than they are now. But again, because of the policy environment, they've kind of gone down a little bit, and that's mostly Colorado and New Mexico. So they're not producing as much as they used to. And even California, I mean, California used to be a very large mining state, and they just don't mine nearly as much anymore as they used to. So that the policy is very important.
So in real life, how possible is it for all these critical minerals to stay here in the United States?
It's very possible if we have the right incentives. I mean, part of the problem is that when you have, so just to give an example that's actually from Idaho. So there's a mine up in Idaho, a cobalt mine, and cobalt's very important for, electric vehicles and for a number of other applications. And the cobalt market has been completely controlled by the Chinese for a very long time. They opened up a cobalt mine up in Idaho, and it took them years to do this and hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. And literally within months, the Chinese flooded the market, pushed the price of cobalt down, and the mine closed. And so this is part of the issue that we have, is that it's one thing to get the mine open, but then you also have to have U.S. manufacturers or the federal government, the Defense Department, that are willing to say, we're going to support these mines because we're going to pay the price that's needed to actually produce them here. Part of the reason that in China they can produce minerals so cheaply, one is because in some cases there's outright slave labor, there's very below market wages, there's not the environmental controls, the safety controls, and in some cases they're willing to just sell things at a loss because they want to control the markets. So we have to handle the market situations as well as the production side of it. So we could do it. We could be totally self-sufficient, or at least self-sufficient in working with our allies, with Canada and Mexico and Australia and other places that have major mining operations, but we have to have the political will to do it. Sir?
How willing are mining companies going to be to put billions of dollars in investment in the milling processes and refinery, knowing that for years pump's going to be gone?
Yeah.
It could be a whole new political environment. Are they going to be willing to make that investment?
Yeah.
That risk?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And one thing I will say is that, once you have an operation up and running, as long as those really what's driven most of the milling and mining or milling and processing operations out of business is not the government, it's market conditions. And so, I think that, once you have a permanent operation, it's a lot harder to close it down. And, not that there haven't been, administrations that have tried to do that, but it is much more difficult. But one of the things that we're really emphasizing with our federal delegation, with Congresswoman Malloy, who represents this area, Senator Curtis, Senator Lee, is to say, look, you have to have purchase contracts in place so that if you do open up an operation, if you have a 10-year purchase contract for germanium, say, with the Department of Defense, then that makes those economics a lot more palatable, because that you've got a solid offtake and you can't have the kind of market manipulation. So there's going to have to be some type of market intervention from the federal government in order to make those investments actually happen. Because we don't want the federal government making the investment. We want the federal government to be buying the products on the backside. We don't want them to be controlling mills and processing operations. So
if someone wants to start a mining operation, is the first step to come to you guys?
We're always happy to help. The first step, there's all kinds of ways you can do that. We've got a lot of sort of small scale operators. People that are very much in the sort of prospecting and exploration stage, where they'll have identified either a historical mine that they think that there might still be resources, or new resources that are out in different parts that just haven't been developed. And in some cases, they'll go out and start proving up that resource. They'll go out and they'll do the drilling and the exploration to prove up that resource. And then in many cases, they'll actually then sell the rights to that resource to a larger mining company. The problem you really run into in mining, the exploration is expensive, but it can be doable by a small scale operator. But once you start developing those mines, it's incredibly expensive, because the capital that's needed to do an underground operation or even a large surface operation, in many cases you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. And so there's very few people that just have that kind of capital available. And that's why you see, again, a lot of the exploration and the prospecting side tends to be smaller scale. But there's the larger operations. There's your Rio Tintos and your BHP, your Freeport-McMorans, et cetera, because you just it can for an operation like Resolution Copper, for example, in Arizona, that Rio Tinto and BHP are doing, they've already sunk about $3 billion into that operation, and it's still not open. After almost 20 years, it's still not open. So there's just very few companies that can handle that kind of capital expenditure.
It's just gotten worse over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I left the mining industry in 1996. I was a consultant at that time. Many of our prospective openings of new mines were killed by the upfront cost
Yeah.
and the risk of not being able to do it because, you know, even getting permits
Yeah.
to mine are millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Not just, you don't go in and ask for a permit and write
Yeah.
a deal. You gotta have all kinds of outlays for experts and studies and things before you can ever mine. We've been asked a lot of times, is there silver back out here? Still? Yes. There's silver, copper, vanadium, and uranium right out here in these sandstones that we mined in the past. Are we gonna mine it again? It's in my backyard.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, not my backyard, in the
Yeah.
United States. We export it.
Yeah.
That's what we've been doing.
well, and I will say that mining operations are incredibly difficult to get up and running, but once they are up and running, I mean, they're really generational assets. And so, I mean, if you look again at some place like the Bingham Canyon mine, you know, that started in 1903, I mean, we've got a funny mineral called gilsonite that's out in Uinta Basin. The American Gilsonite Company started in 1904. You know, a lot of our coal mines have been operating since the 1940s. And so, I mean, it's something that, you know, again, it's hard to get it up and running, but once it is up and running, if you have a good resource, there can literally be generations that can benefit from that. And again, they're very high paying jobs and help to provide things that are necessary for our modern economy. So here in Utah, again, I mean, the energy minerals that we mine are coal, natural gas, and uranium. So those are the ones that are used for energy production directly. I will say though that, you know, if you have almost any energy system, you know, you've got to have copper and you've got to have a lot of other minerals that make those systems operate, you know, for transmission and for other things. I mean, even things like, you know, electrical steel that you need in transformers, you've got to have iron for that. And so there's a lot of minerals that go into that. But yeah, the direct energy minerals in Utah are coal, natural gas, and uranium. So. Sure.
Can you speak about the Gold Strike area? There's a Canadian outfit that is trying to develop that. You know what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, they've been doing exploration there for quite a while. And my understanding is that they're just trying to sort of prove up the resource so that they can go out and get the backers to start, you know, to restart the surface operation. I mean, from what I understand, it's, you know, they believe that there's a fairly rich resource there. And it's similar to what they have up in Iron County with the Gold Springs resource. Again, I mean, it's based around a historic mining district, but they're able to use, you know, modern mining operations, and really they're likely to do it as a surface mine as opposed to the underground mines, which is what they were historically, which allows you to get at a lot more of the resource and get into areas where, again, you can get lower grade ores. You don't have to kind of hit those bonanza veins of ore like you did in the past to really have a really rich mining, a really rich mine. So they're still in the development and exploration stage from the last that I've heard.
Right.
So,
I had
yeah.
visit with that outfit, and he said the mineral is no problem.
Yeah.
The problem is finding water
Yeah.
to process
Yeah.
the ore, and you can't find water.
Yeah, and that's a major issue. I mean, you know, especially if you're trying to do a lot of the processing on site, like finding the water resources can be very, very difficult, especially in some of the western parts of the state. And that's where, again, even going back, I mean, if you do have, you know, companies that have had sort of historical water rights, I mean, that's part of the reason, like Milford Mining up in Beaver County, they've been able to reopen is because you know, there's been a line of companies that have had, you know, have kept those water rights over the years. So even though the new company has nothing to do with the old company, I mean, those water rights have transferred, and so they're able to get the water they need for the processing.
Here we thank Glenn and Brian for giving us such a wide